Hello and welcome to this Martyn Fiddler Aviation UK Tax Week mini webinar. Today I am joined by Greta Kemper and Adrian Jones. And today we are going to be discussing common misconceptions with the new UK tax territory. This forms one of 4 bite-sized tax webinars that we are providing, covering basic customs and VAT rules, common misconceptions, special procedures, and the UK opportunities presented by the new UK tax territory. All of this will culminate in one big live audience-led interactive webinar on the 17th of September. But let's crack on. So, Greta, one of the things that there's often confusion about is the difference between registration and tax status. Can you give us some thoughts on this?
Yes, certainly. Aircraft registration and importation, people tend to assume that one automatically means the other. Historically, there was a connection. So, for example, if an aircraft was registered under a European registration, it could be assumed that it had been imported. Once the single market came in the EU, this connection was mostly broken. So where an aircraft is registered on an EU aircraft registration, it doesn't automatically mean that it has been imported. There are some member states where this connection still relatively holds. For example, in Greece and to some extent in Germany, the aircraft register will not permit a registration where an aircraft hasn't been imported. But in general, for VAT and customs purposes, there is no real link anymore.
Thank you very much, Greta. So, Adrian, another area of confusion is often the difference between flying rules and the customs rules. Can you shed some light on this?
Yes, certainly. And here we're talking about charter aircraft. And there's been a lot of discussion since the UK left the EU about flying rights, third country operator approvals in order to carry out charter flights either within the UK or within the EU. Now, these are important, and obviously any civil aviation permissions that you need in order to carry out a charter flight should be correctly obtained and so on. But that is a separate and distinct point to customs status of the aircraft. Any aircraft that is operating charter within a customs territory should be imported into that customs territory, as well as obtaining any necessary flying rights and permissions. So the flying rights and permissions, generally speaking, are something to do with registration. But registration, as we've just heard, doesn't necessarily mean importation. Sometimes the two go hand in hand. Sometimes one requires the other, but normally now these are separate considerations. So if an operator is looking to charter aircraft within UK customs territory now, that aircraft should be imported into UK customs territory. And that may be in addition, or will now be in addition to being imported into EU customs territory, because they are 2 separate and distinct customs territories. So the message here is, don't confuse the two, don't conflate the 2 concepts, and make sure that both any flying rights, permissions, and also custom status are addressed before you charter within the UK.
Great, thank you, Adrian. Greta, one of the questions that we seem to get quite frequently is in respect of importing aircraft. And the question is it necessary or even possible to import into multiple jurisdictions at the same time?
Well, as we've explained, there is always a binary choice when you look at a customs territory. Does the aircraft need to be imported, or can you use temporary admission? It's possible to be imported into one territory, many territories, or even possibly none at all if you're able to use temporary admission in those territories. What the important thing to do is remember that each territory you need to look at use of your aircraft per territory. Being imported in one does not mean that you're imported into any of the others. Obviously, in the UK, as we've left the EU, that is now a separate territory to the EU. So when you're looking at how much you use your aircraft in Europe, you need to think Europe versus the UK as two separate territories and decide whether you can import into one or both or neither.
Great, thank you. Adrian, so the UK left the European Union 9 months ago. Has anything actually changed regarding UK rules?
In practice, almost nothing has changed in terms of UK rules. The customs rules that were that were effective in the EU when the UK was a member in the EU, those rules have been applied almost 100% to the UK. Very similar rules, very similar method of operation to the EU frontier. This now becomes the UK frontier. We have the same customs tariffs and VAT rate as before, and indeed there are no customs tariffs between the UK and the EU. There are still some control issues to be resolved. Clearly there are special arrangements for Northern Ireland, which we're not going to discuss as part of this webinar. But the key areas of difficulty perhaps are that legislation has had to be put into effect very quickly following the trade and cooperation agreement between the UK and the EU that was agreed quite late in the day in the negotiations. So legislation has been enabling legislation, which then allows customs to put into practice what needs to be done by way of public notice and drafting of guidance. So there has been some perhaps poorly drafted guidance in places as to how the UK might operate for customs purposes, but that has largely been addressed by now, and the UK operates very much in a similar way to before for customs rules. And for VAT, we have a postponed accounting system now. That's the major change for VAT. So any imports for VAT can be deferred and then reclaimed through a VAT registration. So that's a clear benefit for anyone importing into the UK. But aside from that, VAT rules again remain very constant. Aircraft continue to be imported into the UK much in the same way in processes as before, and with the same customs and VAT treatment. The difference being that now an import into the UK Isle of Man customs VAT territory is for the UK Isle of Man and does not include the remainder EU. But given that aircraft may now wish to be imported, or the owners may wish to import their aircrafts into both the UK Isle of Man and EU customs territories, that's still perfectly achievable and equally achievable as it was in the past.
So, Greta, picking up on something Adrian just said about the negotiations, and politicians often talk about or spoke about a special relationship occurring between the UK and the EU, and that was the trade agreement that was being formed. Can you give us some information on that? Is the UK unique in this special relationship?
Well, I suppose it's probably possible to say we're unique in one sense, because the UK is the only member state that has actually left the EU, despite the fact that there was at one stage some thought that Greece was going to leave the EU. In terms of territory, I think it's quite important to remember what now constitutes the EU for VAT and customs purposes. Unsurprisingly, people sometimes forget, because people tend to assume that, for example, Switzerland is part of Europe, Norway, Iceland, etc., the Channel Islands. So when you're looking at where you're importing your aircraft or where you're using it, it is important to be quite clear what that territory constitutes. And obviously the EU no longer includes the UK, Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, the Channel Islands.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Greta. So So one last area that often causes confusion. Adrian, what happens if an aircraft was imported as part of a lease and that lease then ends? Who is the importer?
Well, that's something that needs to be considered at the termination of a lease. Several things might happen. As you say, the importation might be done in the name of the lessor or the lessee. If the lessee is no longer involved with the aircraft, then that importation logically falls away and the aircraft should be imported perhaps or be removed from that customs territory by the lessor. The other thing to consider is that you can have financial leases where title actually changes. Now, there are considerations for VAT where the title is seen to change at the beginning of a financial lease, or where the title changes at the end of the financial lease because that just happens to be something that the parties decide that they wish to conclude at that point, but was never envisaged at the beginning of the lease. So you have to be careful about any tax point consequences. The other issue to do with leases, of course, is that sometimes you have an AOC, a charter business as lessee, and where the aircraft is no longer leased to that charter company, then the exemptions that they might enjoy because the aircraft is chartered, the exemptions for VAT will also fall away on perhaps a subsequent sale or use of the aircraft. So that's another aspect to consider, perhaps one more for airlines than business jet area, but not necessarily something to discount either.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And that concludes today's webinar. So we've been talking today about common misconceptions. Our next bite-sized webinar is going to be on differing UK perspectives from industry regarding the new tax territory of the UK. Thank you so much for watching. All of our webinars will be available on our website, martynfiddler.aero. If you have any questions, please contact us. All of our contact details are available on the website. And that leaves me to say thank you and goodbye.